Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Boserman, and my topic for the oral presentation is tourism and disasters. Tourism plays a huge role in the economies of countries around the world. A few examples include Aruba, Macau, and the Maldives. In Aruba, over 26% of the country's GDP comes from tourism. In Macau, over half of the country is employed in the tourism industry, and 44% of its GDP stems from tourism. In the Maldives, over 41% of the country's GDP is attributed to tourism. Without tourism, these countries would probably have unimpressive economies and would not be nearly as wealthy as they are today. This map shows the percentage of the GDP that comes from tourism in countries across the globe. As you can see, the GDP of places like Canada and Northern Asia do not rely heavily on tourism. However, in Central America and some countries in Africa and Europe, a large portion of the GDP comes from tourism. These tourist-reliant locations need the tourism industry in order to stay afloat and successful. Tourism exposes people to unusual and severe risks because of their potentially dangerous locations. For example, tourist destinations like the beach are areas that could be destroyed at any moment. Hurricanes, tsunamis, and flooding are just some of the potential disasters that these places face on a daily basis. Furthermore, tourism creates risk because many of the visitors are unfamiliar with the area or may not speak the native language. This makes it more difficult for tourists to understand information that is necessary to know in an emergency. Typically, when we think of disasters and tourism together, we think of the negative effects disasters have on tourism. When a disaster strikes, buildings and infrastructures are damaged, which leaves tourists with essentially nothing to do and no reason to be there. With a decrease in tourism rates, the economy of that area will decline. With a poor economy, businesses can't afford to stay open and therefore can't afford to pay their employees. So then there are no open businesses and no employees to run them, leaving the area empty and useless to tourists. This cycle continues until the area affected can pull itself out of the economic disaster and begin catering to tourists again. One example of a disaster that had profound effects on the tourism industry is the 2004 Boxing Day earthquake and subsequent tsunami. This disaster was one of the most deadly tsunamis in recent history, racking up nearly 300,000 deaths across countries. Unfortunately, as you will see in the next slide, most of the areas affected by the tsunami were coastal towns, which is where most tourists visit. Because of this, thousands of tourists and foreign visitors contributed to the death toll. In fact, the number of German and Swedish tourists who died during the disaster was higher in all but the four most affected countries. This map depicts the epicenter of the earthquake and the rise of the sea level due to the tsunami. You can see that the most damaged areas are the ones along the coast, where the tsunami first made landfall and was at its strongest. This slide shows information on the number of visitors to the Thai province of Phuket and the town of Phang Nga. According to the chart, the number of visitors to Phuket in 2004 totaled over 808,000. The following year, that number dropped to 99,000. As for Phang Nga, the number of visitors in 2004 was over 640,000, and in 2005, that number plummeted to a mere 3,600 visitors. These drastic changes in the number of visitors was definitely attributed to the tsunami and has since normalized, but it's important to note that a disaster as deadly as this one can cause significant damage to the tourism industry and economy, even if it doesn't account for a large portion of that country's GDP. Although we tend to focus on the negative effects disasters have on tourism, in many cases, disasters have positive impacts on the affected areas. Sometimes, after a disaster, visitors flock to the area out of curiosity or to pay their respects to the people who lost their lives. This type of tourism is referred to as disaster tourism or dark tourism. This type of tourism is very beneficial to areas impacted by disasters because it provides a source of revenue to the location, which helps them rebuild and improve their economy. Disaster tourism is very popular and something that many of us partake in, oftentimes unknowingly. Some examples of disaster sites that became tourist destinations are listed below. The picture I have included depicts a sign that was displayed in New Orleans, Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. People began giving tours of New Orleans to show the devastation that took place there, and many of the residents were unhappy and felt that these tourists were paying for tours just so that they could see the pain that was inflicted on the locals and their city. One World Trade Center in Ground Zero is an example of a disaster tourism site. This memorial site honors those who died in the September 11th attacks and also serves as a place for people to visit to learn about the terrorist attack and its significance. This site is considered a staple tourist destination in New York City. Pompeii is another example of a disaster tourism site. Thousands of years ago, Mount Vesuvius erupted and destroyed the town of Pompeii, killing many of its residents. The photo on the left depicts an on-site museum that displays a few of the preserved bodies of those who perished in the disaster. People from all over the world travel to Pompeii to see the devastation caused by the volcano. For that reason, Pompeii is considered one of the most popular tourist attractions in Italy. Another example of a disaster tourism site is Pearl Harbor. The photo on the left is of the sunken ship, the USS Arizona, and its memorial that floats above it. The ship is a gravesite with about 900 service members still beneath its wreckage. This memorial serves to honor those who gave their lives for our country and is one of the most popular tourist destinations in Hawaii. In order to protect tourists, emergency plans need to be put in place in all tourist destinations. It's important to educate them before they begin their vacation because they need to be prepared for anything at any time on their trip. First and foremost, evacuation and other emergency instructions need to be available in a variety of different languages so that it is accessible to everyone. I think it would be a great idea to put all visitors to high-risk locations through an orientation process that explains the risks the area faces and the proper way to handle any disaster situation that may come up. Another way to keep tourists as safe as possible is to implement a system that will notify all tourists and personnel of any impending disaster. This could be an intercom system or simply emergency phones in every room. To stay safe as a tourist, it's imperative that you know the evacuation routes for your area and the emergency numbers if you are in a different country. One of the most important things to know is what kind of dangers you face in different areas. For example, if you are traveling to a beach, be aware of the risk of tsunamis and other natural disasters. Another key detail to staying safe is keeping track of important documents such as your passport. If you are in another country and an earthquake hits and you can't find your passport, you may have a hard time getting home. Finally, it's always important to leave a trail behind. You will want to inform your friends and family of where you are traveling and what hotel you are staying at so that they know how to look for you when you don't come home. Unfortunately, there is no way to protect everyone from a disaster because we will always be at the mercy of Mother Nature, but we must do our best to educate ourselves on the potential risks of any location we consider visiting and ensure that we can keep ourselves safe in the event of a disaster.